The idea that all carbohydrates are essentially the same, a source of energy to be used or stored, is a gross oversimplification and one that continues to mislead the public. The truth is, not all carbs act the same in the body, and failing to recognize this difference can lead to serious health consequences. One of the most important and often overlooked distinctions is the glycemic index, GI, a measure of how quickly a food raises blood sugar levels. High GI foods, especially starchy ones like white bread, instant rice, cornflakes, and many processed grain products, trigger rapid glucose spikes, followed by equally sharp crashes. Over time, this roller coaster dynamic contributes directly to insulin resistance, chronic hunger, fat accumulation, and a heightened risk of type 2 diabetes. It's easy to fall into what can be called the glycemic index trap, the mistaken belief that a food labeled carb or even whole grain is inherently healthy, regardless of how it affects blood sugar. The food industry has capitalized on this confusion, promoting high-starch products as nutritious simply because they contain fiber or are technically complex carbs. But complexity doesn't mean stability. Some so-called complex carbs break down almost as quickly as pure sugar. A bowl of instant oatmeal, for example, may be labeled as heart-healthy, but its GI is almost as high as a can of soda. Similarly, white rice or mashed potatoes can spike blood sugar more than a candy bar, depending on the preparation and portion size. This blood sugar volatility doesn't just affect diabetics or those at risk. It affects everyone, especially people who consume carbohydrates frequently throughout the day. When you eat a high GI food, your body responds by releasing insulin to bring down the glucose surge. This insulin spike may initially succeed in lowering blood sugar, but it often overshoots, leaving you in a reactive low, tired, irritable, and craving more sugar or starch. This sets up a vicious cycle of rebound hunger and overeating, even when caloric needs have already been met. And because many of these high GI foods are low in fiber and protein, they offer little satiety, meaning you'll be hungry again in just a couple of hours. This cycle is one of the most underappreciated contributors to obesity and metabolic dysfunction. People think they're eating smart carbs, but they're actually keeping their bodies on a hormonal treadmill, burning sugar, spiking insulin, crashing, and repeating the cycle. Over time, these repeated insulin surges dull the body's response to insulin itself, leading to insulin resistance. This is the silent doorway to prediabetes, belly fat accumulation, elevated triglycerides, and systemic inflammation. It's no coincidence that populations that consume high amounts of high GI carbs have some of the highest rates of metabolic syndrome, heart disease, and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Even the brain is affected by this roller coaster. Glucose is the brain's primary fuel source, but it needs a steady supply, not the spikes and crashes caused by high GI eating patterns. A rapid glucose spike can briefly boost mood or alertness, but the inevitable crash that follows leads to brain fog, irritability, anxiety, and impaired concentration. For students, office workers, or anyone needing mental clarity, starting the day with a high GI breakfast, like toast, sugary cereal, or pancakes, is setting the stage for mental exhaustion by mid-morning. Another danger lies in the invisibility of the GI scale in everyday food marketing. Packages rarely list glycemic index or glycemic load, and most consumers have no idea how their favorite meals impact blood sugar. A low-fat fruit yogurt or granola bar may look healthy, but often contains refined starches and sugars with a GI well above 70. Even foods that seem virtuous, like couscous, white potatoes, or baked crackers, can send blood sugar soaring if not balanced by fiber, protein, or fat. This makes navigating carbohydrate choices treacherous for anyone trying to manage their energy, appetite, or long-term health. The GI trap is especially dangerous for those with sedentary lifestyles. Without the buffering effects of muscle activity and physical exertion, the body is even more vulnerable to glucose surges. Muscles act as glucose sponges when they're active, but when they're idle, excess glucose has nowhere to go except fat storage. That's why office workers, students, and drivers who live mostly inactive days are particularly susceptible to the blood sugar consequences of high GI eating. And let's not forget the emotional manipulation tied to carbohydrate cravings. When your blood sugar crashes, your body doesn't just request food, it demands fast fuel, which usually means more carbs. This craving can feel urgent, even desperate, leading many people to believe they have a willpower problem. In truth, it's not a moral failing. It's a hormonal reaction to bad food choices, often unknowingly made due to deceptive marketing and outdated dietary advice. To break free from the glycemic trap, individuals must first become aware of how their food choices affect blood sugar and insulin, and that requires unlearning many nutritional myths. Not all carbs are equal. High GI starches, even when marketed as whole grain or natural, can wreak havoc on the body's metabolic equilibrium. The solution isn't to eliminate all carbohydrates, but to prioritize low GI, fiber-rich, nutrient-dense sources. Think non-starchy vegetables, legumes, berries, quinoa, and intact whole grains like barley or steel-cut oats, not instant versions. Until the conversation shifts away from simple carb categories and starts addressing the hormonal and metabolic impact of different carbohydrate sources, people will continue falling into this trap, eating foods that destabilize their energy, fuel cravings, and erode their long-term health, all while believing they're making smart choices. The glycemic index isn't just a footnote in nutritional science, it's a critical warning sign, too often ignored.